The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fiery orange and crimson. Tamika Johnson, a hard-working single mother, was locking up the small diner where she worked late hours to support her 7-year-old son, Malik. Her son, with his bright smile and boundless energy, was the light of her life. Tonight, he was with her at the diner, sitting quietly at a table and sketching superheroes on a notepad while she finished her shift. As they stepped into the parking lot, Malik ran ahead, his laughter filling the quiet air. He pointed to their modest blue sedan, a car Tamika had worked tirelessly to pay off. "Mom, I saved the best seat for you," he called, pretending to open the door like a chauffeur. Tamika chuckled, her heart swelling with love. "Thanks, my little gentleman." She ruffled his hair as she unlocked the car. As they climbed in, her phone buzzed with a message from a friend, a reminder of the weekly neighborhood meeting they were due to attend. As Tamika started the car, a black and white police cruiser pulled into the parking lot, its headlights illuminating the vehicle. She didn't think much of it until she saw the man who stepped out. Officer Douglas Haynes, a cop with a reputation for being rough and unpredictable, approached them with a deliberate slowness that sent a chill down Tamika's spine. "Evening," he said, his tone laced with thinly veiled hostility. His piercing blue eyes scanned her and then Malik in the back seat. "You know your tail lights out." Tamika frowned, confused. She was meticulous about maintaining her car. "I don't think it is, officer," she replied, her voice steady but cautious. "I just had my car inspected last month." Haynes smirked, leaning closer. "Maybe you should check again." His tone dripped with condescension. Malik, sensing the tension, peered out the window nervously. "Is there a problem, sir?" Tamika asked, gripping the steering wheel tighter. She had heard stories about Haynes, rumors of harassment and abuse of power, but she had always hoped they were exaggerated. Haynes straightened and stepped back, his smirk turning into something more menacing. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. "Why?" "I haven't done anything wrong," Tamika protested, her voice rising slightly. "You refusing an order, ma'am?" Haynes snapped, his hand moving to rest on the butt of his holstered gun. "No, sir," she replied quickly, her heart pounding. She opened the door and stepped out, glancing back at Malik. "Stay in the car, baby," she said softly. Malik nodded, his wide eyes filled with fear. Haynes circled the car, inspecting it like a predator stalking prey. "You know, people like you always think you're above the rules," he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. "What's that supposed to mean?" Tamika asked, her frustration bubbling to the surface. Haynes stopped and turned to face her, his smirk gone, replaced by a cold glare. "It means you don't belong around here. People like you don't get to drive cars like this and think you can do whatever you want." Tamika's fists clenched at her sides, but she forced herself to stay calm. "I worked hard for everything I have," she said firmly. "I don't need to explain myself to you." Haynes sneered. "Is that so?" He turned abruptly and pulled out a flare from his belt. Tamika's stomach dropped as he struck it, the bright flame hissing to life. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising in panic. Without a word, Haynes walked to the front of her car and held the flare dangerously close to the hood. "Teaching you a lesson," he said coolly. "No!" Tamika shouted, rushing forward, but Haynes drew his gun and pointed it at her. "Step back," he ordered, his voice icy and devoid of emotion. Tamika froze, her chest heaving with fear and rage. Malik's terrified cries echoed from the car. "Mommy! What's he doing?" Haynes smirked again, his gaze flickering to Malik for a moment before he dropped the flare onto the hood. Flames erupted instantly, licking across the car's surface with alarming speed. The acrid smell of burning paint and rubber filled the air as Tamika screamed, running to the driver's side to pull Malik out. "Get out, Malik! Get out now!" she shouted, her voice trembling. Malik scrambled to unlock the door, tears streaming down his face as he stumbled into her arms. Tamika clutched her son tightly, shielding him from the heat of the flames as they backed away. The fire roared, consuming the car within seconds. Haynes stood there, arms crossed, watching the destruction with a twisted sense of satisfaction. "You'll think twice before mouthing off next time," he said, his voice dripping with venom. Then he turned and walked back to his cruiser as if nothing had happened. Tamika's mind raced. Her car, her lifeline, was gone. The flames reflected in Malik's tear-filled eyes, and her heart broke at the fear etched across his face. But something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to let this man get away with this. "Malik, stay here," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "No, Mommy. Don't leave me," Malik cried, grabbing her arm. "I'll be right back, baby," she promised, kissing his forehead. She pointed toward the diner. "Go inside and ask Ms. Carroll to stay with you. Go now." Malik hesitated, but the stern look in his mother's eyes compelled him to obey. He ran toward the diner, glancing back only once to see his mother striding toward Haynes with a determination he'd never seen before. Haynes had just opened the door of his cruiser when Tamika reached him. "You think you can just walk away after what you did?" she demanded, her voice shaking with fury. He turned to her, his smirk returning. "What are you going to do about it?" Before she could respond, the distant wail of sirens pierced the air. Someone must have called the fire department. Haynes frowned, his cocky demeanor faltering slightly. "You're done," Tamika said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm not letting you get away with this." The sirens grew louder, and Haynes glanced around nervously. "You think anyone's gonna believe you over me?" he spat. Tamika held his gaze, her eyes blazing with resolve. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." The sirens wailed louder, their high-pitched urgency slicing through the tense air. The fire consuming Tamika's car had grown, black smoke billowing into the sky. People from nearby shops and homes had begun to gather, their curious and concerned faces lit by the orange glow of the flames. Haynes, realizing he had attracted more attention than he intended, stiffened. His hand twitched toward his radio, but his eyes darted nervously toward the growing crowd. Tamika stood firm, her fists clenched as she stared him down, her son Malik safely inside the diner, watching through the window. "You think these people will just stand by?" she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "You're finished." "Shut your mouth," Haynes growled, stepping closer to her. The arrogance in his tone had dulled, replaced by a flicker of fear he tried to hide. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone he viewed as beneath him. Tamika didn't flinch. Her voice grew louder. "You burned my car in front of my child. You pointed a gun at me. Everyone here saw it. How much longer do you think you can get away with this?" Several bystanders murmured among themselves, their whispers carrying through the smoky air. Phones began to appear, cameras pointed in Haynes' direction. His face tightened as he realized people were recording. "Go home." Haynes barked at the crowd, his voice sharp and commanding. "This is official police business. Move along, or you'll be arrested for obstructing justice." But the crowd didn't budge. If anything, more people pushed forward, their curiosity turning into anger as they realized what had happened. A man near the front, wearing a mechanic's uniform, shouted, "Justice? Burning a mother's car in front of her kid is justice." The murmurs grew louder, punctuated by nods of agreement. A woman holding her phone up yelled, "You're a disgrace. We're not going anywhere." Haynes' hand hovered near his gun, his expression hardening. "Last warning," he growled, though his voice lacked the confidence it had earlier. Tamika, emboldened by the support of the crowd, took a step closer to him. "You don't scare me anymore," she said, her voice unwavering. "You're nothing but a bully in a uniform." Haynes sneered, but his bravado was cracking under the weight of so many watchful eyes. His radio crackled to life, and a dispatcher's voice came through. Unit 245, fire reported at the 800 block of Elm Street. Proceed to investigate. He snatched the radio off his shoulder. 245, already on scene, he replied tersely, his eyes darting back to the growing crowd. Situation under control. Tamika let out a bitter laugh. Under control? You call this under control? She gestured toward her burning car. Everyone here knows exactly what you did. The sirens, now accompanied by flashing red and blue lights, grew deafening as the fire department and additional police units arrived. A fire truck pulled up, its crew jumping into action to extinguish the flames, while 2 patrol cars parked nearby. Officers stepped out, surveying the scene with confusion and alarm. Haynes, one of the officers, a middle-aged man with a calm demeanor, called out. What's going on here? Before Haynes could respond, Tamika stepped forward. He set my car on fire, she said loudly, pointing at him. He threatened me with his gun and did this in front of my son. The officer, whose name tag read Sergeant Walker, looked between Tamika and Haynes, his brows furrowing. Is this true? She's lying, Haynes snapped, his voice a touch too defensive. She's trying to cause trouble. I had to stop her for a broken tail light, and things escalated. Walker's gaze shifted to the crowd. Did anyone see what happened? He asked. Dozens of hands shot up, and voices rang out. He burned her car. He pointed his gun at her. We've got it all on video. Walker's expression hardened as he turned to Haynes. Let me see your dashcam footage. Haynes stiffened. The system's been acting up. It might not have recorded. Walker's jaw tightened, but before he could press further, one of the bystanders shouted, We've got proof. A young man in a hoodie pushed forward, holding up his phone. I caught the whole thing on video. Walker took the phone and played the recording. The video clearly showed Haynes lighting the flare, threatening Tamika, and tossing it onto her car. The crowd watched in silence, their anger bubbling just below the surface. Haynes, Walker said slowly, his tone sharp as a knife. You're going to need to come with me. What? Haynes' face twisted in disbelief. You can't be serious. I was just doing my job. Your job doesn't involve arson or threatening unarmed civilians, Walker replied, motioning for another officer. Cuff him. The crowd erupted in cheers and jeers as Haynes was handcuffed, his face flushed with humiliation. This isn't over, he shouted as he was led toward the patrol car. You'll regret this. Tamika watched, a mix of relief and exhaustion washing over her. The fire had been extinguished, leaving her car a charred skeleton of metal and ash. She felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see Walker standing there. I'm sorry this happened, he said sincerely. We'll investigate this fully, and he'll face the consequences. Tamika nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Malik, who had been watching from the diner, ran to her and threw his arms around her waist. Are you okay, Mommy? He asked, his voice trembling. I'm okay, baby, she whispered, hugging him tightly. We're going to be okay. But as the patrol car carrying Haynes drove away, Tamika couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. Something about the look in his eyes, cold, vengeful, told her that he wasn't done with her yet. Tamika stood in the charred remains of her car, holding Malik close as the crowd began to disperse. The fire department had packed up, and the remaining officers were busy cordoning off the scene for further investigation. The scent of burned rubber and gasoline lingered in the air, a stark reminder of the destruction Haynes had wrought. Mommy, why did that man do that to us? Malik's small voice broke through the heavy silence. His wide, innocent eyes looked up at her, filled with confusion and lingering fear. Tamika crouched down, brushing a hand across his cheek. Some people hurt others because they're filled with hate, baby. But you know what? We're stronger than that. We'll get through this together. Malik nodded slowly, though he clung to her tightly, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. "Ms. Johnson," came a voice from behind her. Tamika turned to see Sergeant Walker approaching. He looked tired but resolute. "I've arranged for a patrol officer to escort you and your son home. It's the least we can do after tonight." Tamika nodded, gratitude mixing with exhaustion. "Thank you, Sergeant." Walker hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Listen, I've seen Haynes pull some questionable stunts before, but nothing like this. I want you to know we're going to hold him accountable. If there's anything you need, legal help, protection, don't hesitate to reach out." Tamika gave him a faint smile. "I appreciate that. But I have a feeling he won't make this easy." Walker nodded grimly. "You're probably right. Just be careful, okay?" The drive home was silent, save for the occasional sniffle from Malik. The escorting officer, a young woman named Officer Ramirez, kept a watchful eye on them, even walking them to their front door to ensure they got inside safely. As soon as the door closed, Tamika leaned against it, the weight of the evening finally crashing down on her. Malik climbed onto the couch, hugging his favorite stuffed animal, a worn-out superhero bear he called Captain Courage. "Mommy, are we going to be okay?" he asked again, his voice small. "Yes, baby," Tamika said firmly, though a knot of uncertainty twisted in her stomach. She sat beside him, pulling him into a tight hug. "We're going to be okay." She didn't sleep much that night, her mind racing with thoughts of what might come next. Haynes' parting words echoed in her head, "This isn't over." The next morning, Tamika woke early to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. When she answered, her best friend, Patrice, wasted no time. "Girl, I just saw the news. Is it true? Did that cop really burn your car?" Tamika sighed, rubbing her temple. "It's true. It was awful, Patrice." Malik saw the whole thing. Patrice cursed under her breath. "That man's a monster. What are you going to do?" "I don't know yet," Tamika admitted. "But I'm not going to let him scare me." "You need to be careful," Patrice warned. "People like him don't back down easily." Tamika thanked her friend for her concern and hung up, determined to stay strong for Malik. But as the day wore on, strange things began to happen. It started with a knock at the door. When Tamika opened it, no one was there, just an unmarked envelope on the ground. Inside was a single piece of paper with a crude drawing of her car in flames, and the words "next time, it won't be your car" scrawled in bold letters. Her heart raced as she slammed the door shut. She immediately called Sergeant Walker, who promised to send someone to investigate. But the dread gnawed at her. It was clear Haynes wasn't going to let this go. Later that evening, as Tamika and Malik sat down to dinner, a sudden loud bang outside made them both jump. Malik clung to her as she cautiously approached the window. The street was quiet, but her mailbox had been smashed in, its contents strewn across the sidewalk. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "You think you can ruin my life and walk away?" Tamika's hands shook as she showed the message to the officer who came to investigate. Ramirez, the same officer who had escorted them home the night before, frowned as she read the text. "This is definitely Haynes," Ramirez said, her voice firm. "But he's smart enough not to use his own phone. We'll trace it, but it might take time." Tamika's anger bubbled to the surface. "How much more time does he need to destroy my life?" Ramirez placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We won't let him hurt you or your son. Just stay vigilant, and call us the moment anything else happens." That night, Tamika decided she couldn't just sit and wait for Haynes to make his next move. She spent hours online, researching her rights, reading stories of others who had faced similar injustices. The more she learned, the more determined she became. By midnight, she had drafted an email to a prominent civil rights attorney. She detailed everything: Haynes' harassment, the destruction of her car, and the threats she'd received. She attached video evidence, photographs, and witness statements she'd gathered from the crowd. Her finger hovered over the send button. This would escalate things, no doubt. But she knew she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. With a deep breath, she clicked send. The next morning, the attorney, a formidable woman named Vanessa Green, called Tamika personally. "Ms. Johnson, I've reviewed your case, and I'm appalled by what you've endured. I want to help you." Vanessa explained that she would file a formal complaint against Haynes and the police department. "This won't be easy," she warned. "People like Haynes have connections. They'll try to intimidate you. Are you ready for that?" "I don't have a choice," Tamika said. "I need to protect my son." Vanessa agreed to meet with her the following day to strategize. But as Tamika hung up the phone, a sense of unease settled over her. Haynes wasn't just going to sit back and watch his life unravel. That night, as the neighborhood fell silent, Tamika heard the faint sound of footsteps outside her house. She peered through the curtains, her breath catching in her throat. A shadow moved near the edge of her driveway, then disappeared into the darkness. She locked all the doors and windows, her heart pounding. Malik slept peacefully in his room, unaware of the danger that seemed to creep closer with every passing moment. Welcome to a story hub dedicated to exposing, understanding, and discussing stories. Here, we dive deep into real-life experiences. By sharing these stories, we hope to create awareness, inspire change, and encourage open dialogue. If you're passionate about building a fairer world, please join us, like, comment, and subscribe to support the community and keep up with new stories each day. The shadow lingered in Tamika's mind long after it vanished. Every creak of the house, every rustle of wind outside made her pulse quicken. She sat in the darkened living room, clutching her phone and a kitchen knife, unwilling to let herself drift into sleep. Malik's steady breathing from his bedroom was the only sound keeping her grounded. Morning eventually broke, bathing the house in warm light and giving her a brief respite from her paranoia. She decided not to tell Malik about the shadow or the smashed mailbox. He'd already been through enough. As they ate breakfast, Malik looked up at her. "Mommy, can I go to the park today? I want to play with my friends." Tamika hesitated. Normally, she would have said yes without a second thought, but with Haynes still looming like a storm cloud, every decision felt loaded with risk. Still, she didn't want Malik to feel like a prisoner in his own home. "Okay," she said finally. "But only for a little while, and I'll be there with you the whole time." Malik's face lit up, and for a moment, the weight of their situation seemed to lift. The park was bustling with activity, children laughing, parents chatting on benches, and joggers making loops around the walking path. Tamika kept a watchful eye on Malik as he joined a group of kids playing tag near the swings. She tried to relax, but her attention constantly flicked to every unfamiliar face. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Vanessa Green. "Tamika, I just filed the complaint against Haynes. The department's going to investigate, but I want you to be prepared for backlash. It's common in cases like this." "Backlash?" Tamika asked, her voice low as she scanned the park. "They'll try to discredit you, maybe even intimidate you. But we're not backing down. I also reached out to some media contacts to amplify your story. The more eyes we have on this, the safer you'll be." Tamika's stomach tightened. Media attention was a double-edged sword, but she knew Vanessa was right. Visibility could be her greatest protection. "Thank you, Vanessa," Tamika said. "I'll do whatever it takes." "Good. Stay strong, Tamika. We'll talk soon." As she ended the call, a familiar figure caught her eye near the park's entrance. It was Officer Ramirez, dressed in plain clothes but unmistakable. Tamika's chest tightened in fear for a moment, but Ramirez waved and approached her casually. "Didn't mean to alarm you," Ramirez said, her tone friendly. "Just thought I'd stop by and check in. I'm off duty, but I wanted to make sure you were okay." Tamika appreciated the gesture, but her suspicion lingered. "Thanks, but we're fine. Just trying to have a normal day." Ramirez nodded, her expression unreadable. "That's good. If you need anything, you know how to reach me." As Ramirez walked away, Tamika couldn't help but wonder if her presence was purely coincidental. That evening, Tamika returned home with Malik, feeling slightly more at ease after their outing. But as she approached the house, she noticed something was off. The front door was ajar. "Malik, stay here," she said firmly, her voice edged with panic. She grabbed her phone and called 911 as she crept toward the door. The operator's calm voice guided her. "Officers are on their way, ma'am. Please don't go inside." But it was too late. Tamika pushed the door open slowly, revealing the chaos within. Furniture had been overturned, drawers pulled out, and their contents scattered across the floor. Malik's toys lay broken and trampled. Her heart sank as she realized this wasn't a random burglary, it was a message. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Another unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Didn't think I'd forget about you, did you?" Haynes' voice was unmistakable, dripping with malice. "This is just the beginning." Tamika's breath caught in her throat. "You're pathetic," she spat, her fear giving way to anger. "You can't scare me." "We'll see about that," Haynes said, laughing before the line went dead. Tamika's hands shook as she hung up. She rushed back to Malik, who was waiting anxiously on the porch. "It's okay, baby," she lied, pulling him into a hug. "We're going to fix this." Police arrived shortly after, Ramirez among them. She surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "This has Haynes written all over it," she said quietly. "But proving it will be tough." "Why can't you just arrest him?" Tamika demanded. "He's already been caught on video burning my car. What more do you need?" "Believe me, I want to," Ramirez said. "But he's got connections, and he knows how to cover his tracks. We need more evidence." Tamika's frustration boiled over. "So what am I supposed to do? Just wait for him to destroy my life?" "No," Ramirez said firmly. "We'll increase patrols in your neighborhood. And if you want, I can help you file for a restraining order." Tamika scoffed. "A piece of paper won't stop him." "I know," Ramirez admitted. "But it's a step. And we're building a case against him. He won't get away with this forever." That night, Tamika couldn't sleep. She sat in the living room, surrounded by the mess Haynes had created, her mind racing. She thought about calling Vanessa, but it was late, and she didn't want to disturb her. Instead, she opened her laptop and began documenting everything that had happened. She created a timeline of events, detailing every interaction with Haynes, every threat, and every act of harassment. She saved photos of the damage to her home and uploaded videos from the crowd at the diner. If Haynes wanted a fight, she was going to make sure she was ready. As she typed, a notification popped up on her screen. It was an email from Vanessa. "Tomorrow, we go public." Tamika stared at the words, a mix of hope and dread swirling in her chest. She knew this was the right move, but it also meant putting herself and Malik in the spotlight. There would be no turning back. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. Tamika glanced toward the curtains, half expecting to see Haynes' shadow lurking again. But the street was empty, the silence unnerving. She locked every door and window before heading to Malik's room. He was sound asleep, clutching Captain Courage tightly. The next morning, Tamika's his phone buzzed, silently vowing to protect him at all costs. News outlets had picked up her story, thanks to Vanessa Green's network. Headlines like "Rogue Cop's Reign of Terror" and "Single Mother Fights Back Against Police Corruption" began to circulate online. Vanessa had arranged for a press conference outside her office, inviting Tamika to share her experience firsthand. Tamika hesitated, staring at the message from Vanessa confirming the conference time. The idea of standing in front of cameras, exposing her life to the world, was daunting. But then she thought of Malik. This wasn't just about her, it was about ensuring his future was free from fear. She dialed Vanessa. "I'll do it." The press conference was held at a modest community center. When Tamika arrived with Malik in tow, she was overwhelmed by the crowd. Reporters, activists, and curious onlookers packed the space. Signs reading "Justice for Tamika" and "End Police Brutality" were held high, while camera crews jostled for position. Vanessa greeted her warmly, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "You're doing the right thing," she said, placing a reassuring hand on Tamika's shoulder. "Just speak from the heart." Malik clung to Tamika's hand as they approached the podium. His wide eyes scanned the crowd, his small frame dwarfed by the towering cameras and booming voices. Tamika knelt down, holding his face gently. "You're my brave boy, okay? Stay close to Ms. Green while I talk." He nodded, though his grip on her hand tightened before she gently let go. As Tamika took the podium, the murmurs quieted. She swallowed hard, her gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. She began slowly, her voice trembling but steadying as she spoke. "I am here today as a mother, a neighbor, and a citizen who refuses to be silenced. Last week, Officer Haynes, a man sworn to protect and serve, set fire to my car in front of my son and an entire community. This was not an isolated incident. It was an act of hatred, fueled by prejudice and a belief that he is untouchable. But I'm here to tell him, and anyone else who shares his mindset, that they're wrong." Applause erupted, but Tamika barely registered it. She was in the moment, pouring out her pain and anger. "I want to thank those who recorded the incident, those who have supported me, and my son, Malik, who has shown more courage than any child his age should ever need to. This fight isn't just for us, it's for every victim who hasn't had the chance to speak out." As she stepped back from the podium, the crowd roared its support. Vanessa guided her off stage, a proud smile on her face. Malik ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You were amazing, Mommy." Tamika kissed his forehead. "Thank you, baby. I did it for you." Later that evening, as the adrenaline wore off, the backlash began. Social media became a battlefield. While many rallied behind Tamika, others attacked her, accusing her of lying, seeking attention, or trying to destroy a man's career. One post in particular sent chills down her spine. "You think you can ruin my life and get away with it? Watch your back." It was from an anonymous account, but she knew who was behind it. Vanessa called shortly after. "I've seen the threats. We're taking every precaution. I'm also arranging for increased security outside your home." Tamika sighed. "I didn't realize how vicious people could be." "It's part of the process," Vanessa said. "But you're not alone in this. The more public support we gather, the harder it will be for Haynes to intimidate you." The following day, Tamika noticed an unfamiliar car parked a few houses down. It had tinted windows, and the engine idled for hours. She tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but something felt off. By evening, the car was still there. She called Ramirez, who arrived within minutes. The young officer approached the vehicle cautiously, hand on her holster. After a tense moment, the driver rolled down the window, a middle-aged man with a smirk that made Tamika's skin crawl. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" the man asked. "This is a residential area," Ramirez said. You've been parked here for hours. Can I see some identification? The man produced a badge. He was an off-duty officer, and though he claimed to be just visiting a friend, Tamika didn't buy it. Ramirez returned to Tamika, her expression grave. It's one of Haynes' buddies, she said quietly. He's trying to send a message. Tamika's resolve hardened. Let them watch. I'm not backing down. That night, Malik fell asleep clutching Captain Courage, unaware of the mounting tension. Tamika stayed up late, documenting the day's events for Vanessa. Just as she was about to power down her laptop, she heard a loud crash outside. She rushed to the window and saw the same car from earlier, its tires screeching as it sped away. Her mailbox had been smashed again, and a brick lay on the porch. Attached was a note, "You're next." She called Ramirez, who arrived with backup. As the officers inspected the scene, Malik woke up, his sleepy eyes widening in fear. "Mommy, what's happening?" he asked. Tamika knelt down, forcing a smile. "Nothing, baby. Just some bad people trying to scare us. But we're safe." The next day, Vanessa called with surprising news. The department is feeling the pressure. Internal Affairs has opened an investigation into Haynes, and the mayor's office is demanding answers. We're making progress. Tamika felt a flicker of hope. But as she hung up, her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. "You think you're winning?" Haynes' voice sneered. "This is far from over." Tamika's hands clenched into fists. "You're going to pay for what you've done." "We'll see about that." The morning after Haynes' call, hanging up, Tamika woke up with a renewed sense of determination. Her fear hadn't vanished, it was still there, pulsing in the background like a low drumbeat, but anger and resolve had overtaken it. She would not let this man win. Malik sat at the breakfast table, eating his cereal, his legs swinging back and forth. He seemed oblivious to the weight Tamika carried on her shoulders, which was exactly how she wanted it. But she couldn't shield him forever, not with Haynes ramping up his threats. Tamika's phone buzzed, and she snatched it up, her heart leaping at the sight of Vanessa's name. "We've got a development," Vanessa said, her voice tinged with both caution and hope. "Internal Affairs has found evidence that Haynes has been falsifying reports and intimidating witnesses for years. We're building a strong case, but it's going to take time. Meanwhile, I've got more media outlets interested in your story. The pressure is working." "That's good news," Tamika said, her voice steady. "But he's not backing down. Last night, he sent someone to vandalize my property again." "I'm going to escalate this with the police," Vanessa assured her. "We'll demand a protective detail for you and Malik." Tamika sighed, glancing at her son, who was now engrossed in his coloring book. "Thank you. I'll do whatever it takes to keep him safe." Later that afternoon, Ramirez stopped by to check in. She brought along 2 other officers, both of whom seemed genuinely sympathetic to Tamika's plight. "We're here to install security cameras around your property," Ramirez explained. "They'll stream directly to a secure server, and you'll have access to the footage in real time. If Haynes or anyone else tries anything, we'll catch them." Tamika nodded, grateful for the gesture but still wary. "I appreciate this, but cameras won't stop him if he's determined." "No, but they'll help us build an ironclad case against him," Ramirez said. "And don't worry, he's being watched, too. Internal Affairs is keeping tabs on his every move." As the officers worked, Malik wandered outside, his curiosity piqued by the new equipment. "What are they doing, Mommy?" he asked. "They're putting up cameras to keep us safe," Tamika explained, crouching down to his level. "It's like having superheroes watching over us." Malik's eyes lit up. "Like Captain Courage?" "Exactly," Tamika said, forcing a smile. "Just like Captain Courage." That night, Tamika felt a rare sense of calm. The security cameras were up, and Ramirez had promised increased patrols in the neighborhood. Vanessa's updates about the investigation gave her a glimmer of hope that justice might finally be within reach. But as she tucked Malik into bed, her unease returned. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "I love you, baby," before heading to her own room. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, kept her on edge. Around midnight, she was jolted awake by the sound of shattering glass. Her heart raced as she grabbed her phone and rushed to Malik's room. He was sitting up in bed, clutching Captain Courage, his wide eyes reflecting her fear. "Stay here," she whispered, locking his door behind her. Tamika crept toward the living room, where the sound had come from. The glass panel on the front door was broken, shards littering the floor. A faint smell of gasoline filled the air, and her blood ran cold. Through the jagged hole, she saw a flaming object, a Molotov cocktail, lying on the porch. Without thinking, she grabbed a blanket from the couch, ran outside, and smothered the flames. Her hands trembled as she doused the last ember, her eyes scanning the dark street for any sign of movement. Her phone buzzed. Another anonymous message, "Next time, it'll be the house." Tamika's knees buckled, but she forced herself to stay standing. She called 911, her voice steady despite the terror threatening to consume her. The police arrived within minutes, Ramirez leading the charge. "This is escalating," she said grimly, examining the remnants of the Molotov cocktail. "We'll collect evidence and step up patrols, but Tamika, you need to consider leaving the city for a while." "And go where?" Tamika snapped, her frustration boiling over. "This is my home. Why should I be the one to run?" "I understand how you feel," Ramirez said. "But Haynes is dangerous, and he's clearly escalating. We need time to bring him down, and I don't want you or Malik caught in the crossfire." Tamika stared at her, torn between her pride and her fear. "I'll think about it," she said finally. The next day, Vanessa called with another update. "The media response has been overwhelming," she said. "Your story is trending nationwide, and civil rights groups are getting involved. Haynes won't be able to hide for much longer." "That's good," Tamika said, though her voice lacked enthusiasm. "But he's not hiding, he's coming straight for me. He tried to firebomb my house last night." Vanessa's gasp was audible. "Oh my God, Tamika. Are you and Malik okay?" "We're fine," Tamika said. "But I don't know how much more of this I can take." "You're stronger than you think," Vanessa said. "And you're not alone. I'll reach out to some organizations that can provide additional support. We'll get through this." That evening, Tamika sat with Malik in the living room, trying to create a semblance of normalcy. They played a board game, and for a brief moment, she almost forgot about the chaos outside. But then the doorbell rang. Tamika froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. Grabbing a kitchen knife, she cautiously approached the door and peered through the peephole. It was Ramirez. Tamika exhaled in relief and opened the door. "You scared me," she said. "Sorry about that," Ramirez said. "I just wanted to check in and see how you're holding up." Tamika invited her in, grateful for the company. They talked for a while, Ramirez offering reassurances and strategies for staying safe. But as Ramirez left, she paused at the door. "Be careful, Tamika," she said. "Haynes is desperate, and desperate men are the most dangerous." As the night wore on, Tamika found herself unable to sleep again. She sat in the living room, watching the security camera feeds on her laptop. The street was quiet, the only movement coming from the occasional car passing by. Then, just after 2 a.m., a figure appeared on the feed. Dressed in dark clothes, they moved stealthily toward her house, carrying what looked like a gas can. Tamika's heart stopped. She grabbed her phone and dialed Ramirez directly. "He's here," she whispered, her voice trembling. Someone's outside with a gas can. I'm on my way, Ramirez said. Stay inside and lock the doors. As Tamika waited, the figure circled the house, stopping near the kitchen window. She couldn't see their face, but she knew who it was. She clutched the kitchen knife, her mind racing with fear and anger. The sound of sirens pierced the night, and the figure bolted, disappearing into the shadows. Tamika exhaled shakily, her body trembling with adrenaline. Ramirez arrived moments later, her squad car's lights casting eerie flashes across the house. We'll catch him, she promised, her voice firm. He's running out of places to hide. The tension in Tamika's home was suffocating after the latest attack. Though the immediate threat had been thwarted by Ramirez and her squad, the damage to Tamika's peace of mind was irreparable. Malik clung to her every moment, his youthful innocence replaced by an understanding no child should have. The neighborhood buzzed with outrage and support, yet fear simmered beneath the surface. Everyone knew Haynes wasn't done, and his next move could be catastrophic. Vanessa called early the next morning. Tamika, it's time to go public in a big way. We're holding a rally downtown this afternoon. Activists, lawyers, and even local officials are on board. This is the moment to shine a spotlight on Haynes' corruption and demand accountability. Tamika hesitated. The idea of standing before an even larger crowd, bearing her soul yet again, felt overwhelming. But Malik's voice cut through her doubts. Mommy, will there be people there who can stop the bad man? She knelt down and held his small hands. We're going to try, baby. We're going to try. The rally was unlike anything Tamika had ever seen. Hundreds of people gathered in the city square, holding signs that read "Justice for Tamika" and *End Police Terror. The atmosphere crackled with energy, a mix of righteous anger and hopeful determination. Tamika stood on the makeshift stage, Malik at her side, while Vanessa introduced her to the crowd. When it was her turn to speak, Tamika took a deep breath, gripping the microphone tightly. I never thought I'd be here, standing before all of you, fighting for my right to live without fear. But here I am, because of one man's hatred, a man who abused his power to terrorize me and my son. Her voice grew stronger with every word. This isn't just my fight. It's our fight. It's for every mother who fears for her child, for every family torn apart by injustice. Together, we can make sure no one else suffers the way we have. The crowd erupted into cheers, their chants echoing through the city streets. Malik beamed up at his mother, his pride shining brighter than the afternoon sun. But Haynes wasn't done. Watching the rally unfold on live television, his fury boiled over. He saw his name plastered across headlines, his face emblazoned on posters. Everything he had worked to bury was now in the spotlight. She's going to pay, he muttered to himself, pacing his cluttered living room. His anger consumed him, clouding his judgment. He grabbed his gun and keys, a dangerous plan forming in his mind. Meanwhile, Ramirez had been keeping close tabs on Haynes. She knew he was a powder keg ready to explode, and the rally was likely to provoke him further. When he abruptly left his home, she followed, keeping her distance but never letting him out of her sight. As Haynes drove toward the city square, Ramirez radioed for backup. He's on the move. Heading toward the rally. I think he's planning something big. Understood, came the reply. Units are en route. At the rally, Tamika was wrapping up her speech when the commotion began. The crowd shifted uneasily as shouts erupted near the edge of the square. Tamika scanned the faces, her heart sinking as she spotted Haynes pushing through the throng, his gun drawn. Everyone, get down, someone screamed. Chaos erupted as people scattered, seeking cover. Tamika froze, her body shielding Malik instinctively. Haynes' voice rang out, sharp and venomous. You think you can ruin me? You think you can take everything I've worked for and walk away? Ramirez burst onto the scene, her gun aimed squarely at Haynes. "Drop the weapon, Haynes. It's over." But he wasn't listening. His rage had consumed him completely. "She's the reason my life is falling apart," he shouted, pointing the gun at Tamika. "Tamika, stay down." Ramirez barked, moving closer, her finger hovering over the trigger. Tamika held Malik tightly, whispering calming words despite her own terror. She refused to give Haynes the satisfaction of seeing her break. The standoff seemed to stretch into eternity. Finally, Ramirez took a calculated risk. She fired, the shot ringing out like a thunderclap. Haynes dropped his weapon and crumpled to the ground, clutching his shoulder. The crowd erupted again, this time in cheers. Ramirez's backup arrived, swiftly apprehending Haynes and escorting him away. In the days that followed, the fallout was swift and decisive. Haynes was charged with multiple counts, including arson, attempted assault, and misconduct. Internal Affairs expanded their investigation, uncovering a web of corruption that implicated several other officers. Tamika became a symbol of resilience and courage. Her story inspired protests, policy changes, and a renewed push for police accountability. Activists rallied behind her, ensuring her voice would never be silenced again. But for Tamika, the greatest victory was the peace that finally returned to her home. Malik slept soundly at night, his laughter filling the house once more. And as Tamika tucked him in one evening, he whispered, "You're my hero, Mommy." She kissed his forehead, tears streaming down her face. "No, baby. You're mine." The battle had been long and harrowing, but Tamika knew they had won, not just for themselves, but for a future free from fear.